26th, 2020. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of theBreaker.news and host of the Breaker.news podcast. Welcome to edition number 144. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support The Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and Pacific Northwest, the Is It Just Me commentary, the Big Deal feature, this week in the WE scandal, Conservative and NDP MPs grilled the finance minister, the publisher who has led the way, and a researcher who has crunched the numbers. Highlights from the Finance Committee hearing. Plus, I'll award a virtual Nanaimo bar to those making a difference. Now, is it just me? Is it just me, or is a fall election in British Columbia wrong? All wrong. This is what Premier John Horgan said when he was asked about the possibility on July 23rd.
Between now and next fall, we need to have an election. It's mandated by next October. And so there's an opportunity this fall, there's an opportunity next spring, there's an opportunity next summer. When that happens is not necessarily clear to me today. What is clear to me is that the legislature is sitting. We have stimulus dollars that we're discussing with Cabinet how to spend to keep the economy going and to focus on making sure people have the services that they need. That's my number one preoccupation, whether we're in a pandemic or not.
Factions of the governing NDP are encouraged by strong polls showing that the NDP would easily parlay their minority into a majority. Some major media outlets drool at the prospect of the advertising revenue. But is democracy served by an election during a pandemic? British Columbians wonder what the next 4 months will bring. They wonder if they will have jobs, and they worry about catching the coronavirus. Now is not the time to force them to consider who will govern for the next 4 years. Message to Premier John Horgan. Your mandate runs out in October 2021. Don't get greedy. What do you think? Email Bob at theBreaker.news. It's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim. Jun Mai and Guo Rui in the South China Morning Post. Tycoon Ren Jichang, who criticized Chinese leadership, facing prosecution. Influential business chief was nicknamed Ren the Big Cannon for outspoken attacks on the Communist Party and Xi Jinping's expansion of power. Party disciplinary body says the real estate tycoon has been expelled, and evidence that he used public money for his personal benefit has been handed to prosecutors. While Ren's whereabouts are not known, his friends said that the tycoon was taken away from his sister's home in Beijing by the party's anti-graft officials in March. That was after he wrote an article critical of the initial missteps of the government in handling the coronavirus outbreak. Andrew Green and Stefan Zizek in ABC News Australia. Chinese diplomat accused of spying operation in the U.S. used to work in Australia. The Chinese Consul General in Houston, Chai Wei, used to be a senior diplomat in Australia. The Chinese consulate in Houston has been ordered to close over subversive behavior. Between 2014 and 2019, the career diplomat was deputy chief of mission at the Chinese embassy in Australia and had previously worked in the other posts, including in Canada. In 2018, the ABC revealed Chai Wei used a dinner gathering with Labour MPs in Canberra to strongly deny the Chinese Communist Party was trying to control foreign students studying in Australia. China retaliated by ordering closure of the U.S. consulate in Chengdu. Ryushi Takahashi in the Japan Times. Tokyo faces another critical weekend as daily infection rate hits record high. Tokyo Governor Yuriko Koike urged residents to stay inside and avoid all non-essential travel during an unprecedented surge of the novel coronavirus. This was supposed to be the first weekend of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, which were postponed to summer 2021. In the last weekend of March, the city had reported more than 40 cases for 3 days in a row. On Friday, Tokyo recorded an additional 260 cases of COVID-19, Osaka 149, and 60 in Aichi, recording over 50 for the fourth consecutive day. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest. Kay Rambo in the Oregonian Portland officials demand feds remove courthouse fence in bike lane. The Portland Bureau of Transportation demanded the federal government remove a reinforced fence in front of the federal courthouse because the fence was placed in a bike lane without permits. The fence became the flashpoint of the 56th night of anti-police protests when federal officers tear-gassed demonstrators and fired pepper balls at them. Mayor Ted Wheeler was tear-gassed on Thursday night by militarized federal police. A judge ordered them to stop arresting journalists and legal observers. Mike Riker in the Seattle Times. Judge rules Seattle media companies must hand over protest images to police. A King County Superior Court judge found the unpublished photos and video were critical for an investigation into the alleged arson of Seattle police vehicles and theft of police guns. Lee said news organizations were not protected by Washington state's SHIELD law that under many circumstances prevents authorities from obtaining reporters' unpublished materials. The judge said police could use the images to identify suspects only in the arson and gun theft investigations. Detectives could not use the photos or video to pursue suspects in vandalism or other lesser crimes, even if police found such evidence. In the Haida Gwaii Observer, the village of Queen Charlotte reactivated its emergency operations center at the regular council meeting on July 20th. The village of Queen Charlotte's Devin Richard became the third councillor to resign in 3 weeks. The next scheduled election is more than 2 years away. The restaurant at the Sandspit Inn was open for one final time on June 28th. On July 22nd, a chattel sale. A landlord, Transport Canada, decides the next steps. And on July 24th, BC government officials announced that there were 13 coronavirus cases in Haida Gwaii. And these headlines this week in theBreaker.news. A joint investigation with David Malko of CTV News Vancouver and documentary filmmaker Ina Mitchell, how a military-style boot camp on Salt Spring Island is related to a Surrey murder mystery. Plus stories about BC Lottery Corporation's money laundering woes and cutbacks at the Vancouver Economic Commission. Read the stories behind the headlines. Go to theBreaker.news. This is the Big Deal feature on the theBreaker.news podcast. The House of Commons Finance Committee was the latest to investigate the WE scandal on July 22nd. Amid more revelations about the Liberal-connected charity and social enterprise, sponsors began to leave WE, and calls for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's resignation increased. Trudeau gave his friends Craig and Mark Kilberger a $912 million no-bid contract to administer a student jobs program. WE stood to gain $43 million. A nice payback for giving Margaret Trudeau and Sacha Trudeau well-paid speaking gigs. Toronto-based Canadaland has led the way in shining light on the Kilberger brothers' glitzy charity and business empire. Canadaland publisher Jesse Brown testified at the committee hearing about his publication's work and the challenges that it has faced on the story.
Me to We, the company controlled by Mark and Craig Kilberger, was described to Canadaland by a former employee as, quote, first and foremost about money, despite its noble beginnings. While the We organization insists publicly that the two entities are completely separate and distinct, internal We organization documents obtained by Canadaland reveal that We's, quote, mission is to, quote, create a single brand experience with one overarching brand. The We organization's claim that 90% of the profits earned by Me to We are then returned to We Charity was not something that Canadaland was able to independently verify. What is known is that money flows in the opposite direction, from We Charity to the Kilbergers' private company. The amounts are significant, $11 million over the last 10 years. The amount of money transferred out of the charity and into the private company increased sharply in the last 2 years, period of time in which We Charity was in breach of its bank covenants, as revealed by We's own audited financial statements. A little bit more to say as our reporting progressed, the revelations about We became more serious. Canadaland obtained a recording of Mark Kilberger in conversation with a senior employee who talked openly about bribing government officials in Kenya. This employee made violent threats towards another We employee. When We was questioned about this recording, We's lawyer told Canadaland that the employee had been stealing charitable funds from We and that Mr. Kilberger made the phone call at the request of Kenyan police. When asked by Canadaland to provide documentation supporting this claim, Mr. Kilberger did not. There was another instance of misused charity funds when the We organization publicly insisted that they had never paid members of the Trudeau family for speaking at We Day. Canadaland discovered this was simply not true. Not only had they paid Margaret and Sasha Trudeau over $300,000, but $64,000 of the payments to Margaret Trudeau came directly from We Charity. Canadaland also revealed that a daughter of Finance Minister Bill Morneau spoke without pay at a We Day event and received an endorsement for her book from Mark Kielburger, and that later another daughter of Minister Morneau went to work for We Day in the same month that Minister Morneau announced $3 million in government funding for We. In summary, in conclusion rather, the information that Canadaland reported and which I just shared did not come easily. The employees who spoke with us did so despite contracts that we had asked them to sign, which prohibited them from criticizing We for the rest of their lives and which claimed to hold their heirs liable if they ever do so. When Canadaland sent the We organization 11 early questions, they sent us 33 questions back. Why were we asking? What would we be publishing, and so on. They later asked us who our sources were. They told us that they wouldn't answer our questions unless we answer theirs, which we refused. Our reporting persisted. As we continued to investigate, their lawyers hired a private investigation firm to investigate us. Specifically, they investigated the personal life of our reporter, Jaron Kerr, and my own personal life. The information this firm investigated included, for some reason, the name of my then 8-year-old son and speculation about which school my children attended. My colleagues and I endured these pressures in order to put all of what I just said onto the public record, so that anyone considering engaging with the We organization, be they a youth volunteer, a school, a donor, a possible partner, could make informed decisions about how to proceed.
Researcher Vivian Krause testified from North Vancouver. She found that We took in $118 million from U.S. corporations last year, such as $32 million from Allstate Financial, $10 million from Microsoft and Unilever, and $4.6 million from KPMG USA. But 3/4 of the donations were without tax receipts. The We charity events pack hockey arenas with teens and millennials who are exposed to politicians like Trudeau. What goes on in the background at We? Krause wonders.
Consumer data is collected by We. Consumer data mostly for children, young people. We says that as part of their literature for this specific program, they have almost 4 million people in their movement. If that's the case, that's a gold mine of consumer data about a highly desirable, hard-to-reach market segment, children and millennials. Lastly, this got me thinking, what does We do with all that data? So I read their privacy policy. And what I find in their privacy policy is that We clearly spells out the restrictions that We charity has promised to adhere to with regards to personal information. It also specifies very clearly that We does share data with third parties. So last week I wrote to We and I asked, well, who do you share your data with? Do you share it with your corporate partners? Is that part of the reason, perhaps, that big companies like Microsoft, TELUS, Nordstrom are paying so much to We? I also asked whether We charity provides this data to political parties, and specifically to the Liberal Party of Canada.
Krause is still waiting for answers from We. Finance Minister Bill Morneau revealed that he had paid back more than $41,000 for trips to We missions. NDP member Charlie Angus grilled Finance Minister Morneau about the no-bid contract and how it was structured.
Well, I guess the issue here is that We paid for your travel. That has the apparent perception of attempting to buy political influence. The fact that you're talking with Craig Kielburger, you're talking with We, I'm not sure they're registered to lobby. They're hiring your daughter. You're not thinking that there's a problem here, but they're paying for influence. I think that that's really, really concerning that you didn't seem to think that that was a problem. So I'd like to end on the question. With We, you signed a contribution agreement with a real estate holding company. How in God's name is that a credible decision by the government of Canada to funnel nearly $1 billion to a group that's very close to you and your family, that's very close to the Prime Minister and his family, a group that had gone through there was no public tender here, and they come up with a real estate holding company and you file the money through them? What were you thinking?
Mr. Minister, final answer this round.
Thank you. Well, to start with, as I've said, I certainly was in error not paying expenses. I didn't know about those expenses being paid in my behalf, but that was an error, and I have owned up for that error. I know that the government decision around the administration of this program was taken after the appropriate due diligence by the public service. I don't know of which organization in the WE decision was the organization that was given to that contract. That's not something that was brought to my attention. Of course, we expect
real estate holding company, and you didn't double check that. Where is the due diligence, Minister?
As I've said, Mr. Chair, the public service took a look at how we could best deliver this program and how it could be best administered. And that recommendation was the one that we looked at in order to deliver on behalf of students.
Conservative member Pierre Pollievre called for Morneau to resign.
In accepting $41,000 of secret travel expenses, you've only admitted now that you did that. The same day you're called to testify under oath in the matter, over a year after the gifts were accepted. You are a minister who has already been found guilty of violating the Conflict of Interest Act when you failed to reveal the existence of your villa in France. Minister, you have lost the moral authority to hold your office. And it is the position of Her Majesty's loyal opposition that you resign. Will you resign?
Mr. Minister, the floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, and to the questioner, I want to just make very clear that there were, in fact, mistakes made here. I have said quite clearly that in hindsight, I should have recused myself from this decision when it came to Cabinet. I did not know that there were expenses that had not been charged to me in that travel, and that work.
Sorry, Minister.
Mr. Pollievre, we're usually pretty sticky the other way in time, so we'll be sticky this way today. The Minister has the floor for a little longer. Go ahead, Mr. Minister.
As I said, I did not know that there were expenses that were not charged to me, but I'm not making an excuse. It was my mistake not to have taken responsibility to ensure that those expenses were paid. And I found that out only with a thorough review of my records over the course of the last few days. And that is absolutely a mistake on my behalf. I've then turned around to reimburse,
Chair,
which I know is important.
Chair.
And I will
Minister,
continue.
Still has time.
I will continue to work on behalf of Canadians. I want to put this in context. The program that we were trying to deliver for students to get them engaged in volunteering, we believe is very important, and that's important work that I will continue to do with my government.
Over to Mr. Pollievre.
Canadians will find it impossible to believe that this organization showered you with $41,000 worth of luxury and accommodations, and that you didn't know about it. That somehow you were enjoying all of these benefits and expenses paid for you while you were on an exotic vacation to Ecuador, and that somehow you didn't even know that the expenses occurred. Who did you think was paying for all of the wine and the food and the luxury travel that you were consuming? Did you think that it was just falling out of the sky, Minister? Who did you think was paying for these tens of thousands of dollars of luxurious expenses that you were enjoying? Where did you think it was coming from?
That's the last question. We'll give the Minister time to respond. Go ahead, Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. As I've said, we did go back and look at our records and found the travel and hotel costs, but didn't find any charges to us from the WE facilities. this should have been something that we rectified sooner. It was absolutely in error. I, in looking through my records, was completely surprised at this situation, and that's not an excuse. That's just what happened. So I, Mr. Chair, can just say that again. This was an excuse, and that's no excuse, rather, and it's a mistake.
Keep reading theBreaker.news and listen to the Breaker.news podcast for developments in the WE scandal. The virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting. Every week we end the Breaker.news podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo bar to a person or group that is making a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to Councillor Colleen Hardwick, who led the campaign to get an independent Auditor General at Vancouver City Hall. An important move to clean up the culture of waste and corruption at 12th and Cambie. Since 2012, BC has had an Auditor General for local government, but not once has the office investigated Vancouver City Hall, the elephant in the province. Thanks to Councillor Hardwick, that will change. You can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo bar. Send us an email to bob@theBreaker.news. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca. That's it for the Breaker.news podcast for the week of July 26th, 2020. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on July 26th in 1977, Quebec's National Assembly declared French, français, the official language of the provincial government? Now you know. Send me your feedback and send me your story ideas to bob@theBreaker.news. Bookmark theBreaker.news. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca. Sign up for the email newsletter and get updates to your inbox. For news as it happens, follow The Breaker News on Twitter and visit theBreaker.news on Facebook. You can support The Breaker for as little as $2 a month. For more information, go to patreon.com/TheBreakerNews. That's patreon.com/TheBreakerNews. Until next week.